Once upon a time, there was a little girl who everyone loved because she was so kind and sweet. Her mother always dressed her in a red hood, so everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother prepared a basket of food and said, "My dear daughter, take this basket to your sick grandmother. But be careful, don't lose your way in the forest, and don't talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood listened to her mother's words and set off on her journey. As Little Red Riding Hood walked through the forest, she ran among the flowers and listened to the birds singing. Suddenly, a sly wolf appeared before her. The wolf was curious and asked, "Hello, little girl. Where are you going?" Little Red Riding Hood forgot her mother's warnings and replied, "I'm going to my grandmother's house. She is sick, and I'm bringing her some food." The wolf immediately devised an evil plan and smiled slyly. "Where does your grandmother live?" he asked. Little Red Riding Hood described her grandmother's house, at the end of the forest, behind the big trees. "She lives in a little cottage." The wolf saw his chance and decided to go to the grandmother's house before Little Red Riding Hood. He took a shortcut and soon reached the grandmother's house. He knocked on the door and, imitating the grandmother's voice, said, "It's me, grandmother. I've arrived." When the elderly woman opened the door, the wolf quickly gobbled her up and took her place in bed. A little while later, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the house. But when she entered, she noticed that her grandmother looked very different. The wolf immediately devised an evil plan and smiled slyly. "Where does your grandmother live?" he asked. Little Red Riding Hood described her grandmother's house, at the end of the forest, behind the big trees. "She lives in a little cottage." Little Red Riding Hood approached the bed and asked with suspicion, "Grandmother, what big ears you have, all the better to hear you with." "My dear," said the wolf. Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer and said, "Grandmother, what big eyes you have, all the better to see you with." "My dear," said the wolf. Then she asked, "But grandmother, what big, sharp teeth you have, all the better to eat you with," shouted the wolf as he leapt toward Little Red Riding Hood. At that moment, a hunter was walking through the forest and heard strange noises coming from the grandmother's house. He rushed inside and, seeing the wolf, immediately acted. The hunter caught the wolf and rescued the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood. He cut open the wolf's belly, and out came the grandmother first, then Little Red Riding Hood. Both were safe and sound. The hunter filled the wolf's belly with heavy stones and sent him back into the forest. The weight of the stones caused the wolf to fall into a river, and he was never seen again. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood listened carefully to her mother's warnings. She never spoke to strangers in the forest again. Kids, you should never talk to strangers when you're outside. Always listen to your mom and dad because they know what's best to keep you safe. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories. You can write in the comments which story you'd like to hear next.